We've allocated another 7 minutes in this session before we go to robust anchoring for general requirements on annotation models and systems. So we've heard from publishers, we've heard from education people, we've heard from a variety of people that have different requirements, and now the rest of you probably also have requirements, people who didn't get up on stage. And I'm curious if anybody here has a different perspective on what we should be doing here. Does anybody have requirements that you'd like for us to discuss here? Okay, great. Thank you. And say your name first.
Hi, I'm Phil Dessen. I work at Harvard University. I work with Harvard X.
Bill.
Phil Dessen, yes. So we have some very specific use cases within the educational and online teaching and referring to the provenance of the target that we're annotating. One is you're bringing in a fragment, these annotations back to the original source. So there needs to be a way of being able to reference the two targets so that we can then map those annotations back to the original source. And those are issues that we need to figure out at least within the educational platform, but there's probably other use cases similar to that one.
Okay. So just to be clear, could you...
So I guess what I'll explain the use cases.
Sorry. Let me just. She's just transcribing it. So for the transcription, basically the idea of tying one annotation to two different sources. If there's two different digital versions of one source, how do you tie those two things together?
More or less. Okay. We can talk about that further and address it after.
Okay.
I have a request.
Okay.
Oh, thanks.
Go ahead.
So my name is Alex, and I was just wondering.
Alex.
From I work for the American Psychological Association, and my interest is more in how do you understand the difference between the annotation, where does it end, and where does the conversation begins? Because sometimes, from our experience, it happens that you start by an annotation. You reference the annotation to the text, that's fine, that's okay, but then someone will comment on the annotation, meaning that someone will annotate the annotation. And that, in my view, it's kind of a conversation. It follows more of a conversational model rather than an annotation model. So that's a requirement that I think we should discuss.
Did you want to address that specifically, or okay? I'll be right back with you. Oh, no, that's not going to work.
Hi, Anna again. So I just think, harking back to something that Nick said about the data models, the protocols, the user experience, I think it's really important when we talk about things like where does the annotation and the conversation split up, that when we're talking about requirements, maybe break them into those categories. Because I know with the OA, we really focused on data model requirements, and we canvassed the community and came up with lots of different requirements for the data model, but we didn't really cover the protocols or the user application space.
And I think Randall Leeds have had, and I have conversations about the idea of a conversation like that being an annotation on an annotation, and to some degree, I think it doesn't matter if it's a conversation or if it's an annotation. I mean, we think of annotations classically as something about a larger body of work, but if it could be that the annotation is longer than the body of work. So there's some parts at which the traditional annotation model breaks down in a digital framework, I think. But it's interesting to keep talking about that. And Rick Johnson, you had?
Yeah, Rick Johnson with in thinking about the usage of annotations, I think it's important, and one of our requirements is a way of dealing with levels of authority, because not all annotations are created the same. And as a user, when I'm using something, I want to understand either explicit or implicit authority. Is this coming from the publisher of the book, or the author of the book, or the instructor of my class, or another one of my classmates, or somebody else in the school, or just somebody else outside there? And I'm going to make that judgment call, but I'm going to want to have some way of relating that information and implying authority or trust spheres.
Yeah, I think that's a big issue. I think that's another one of those elephants in the room, where reputation services, reputation systems, and how do you quantify reputation, and do you, I think that's a big thing Randall and I have argued about. Go ahead, Yvonne.
Well, so to be honest, I don't remember which speaker talked about provenance, but I know it was mentioned by someone. Oh, yeah. So provenance in general is very important. Now, this is one aspect of provenance, obviously, but somehow to be able, if needed, to record provenance, how to do that. Yet another elephant. We have a whole team of
We have a whole herd of elephants. Okay, we've got Paolo over here. I'll come back.
Two comments. One is on provenance. In science, we are trying to report as much provenance. Paolo? Yeah. As much provenance as we can, and we go into provenance of annotation, provenance of collections of annotations, provenance related to what we are annotating and what at that moment was that resource, and so on. So lots of different levels of provenance. And obviously, we kept the open annotation model skinny in that sense because we wanted to experiment and see what was going to happen. But it's possible to add provenance there and how many layers you need. And the other one is about discussions. When you're trying to implement discussions, the model allows you to do whatever you want. And you can just comment always on the same annotation or chain them or split them. The problem is when you go up in the chain into protocol and user interface, the complexity is exploding. And so if I do something very simple, everybody understands it. If I do it very complicated, splitting topics and go like a sun that goes out and you can branch everything, then nobody will be understanding me. So I like the idea of splitting the different levels in terms of requirements.
And for your name?
Philippe Aigrin from Comment. I like to come back to the issue of the kind of environment around annotation, in particular in education applications, because at the same time we have to recognize the need for things like addressability or authorship of annotation or value of annotation or whatever, but we should be very careful about not including any particular vision of how that's done in a standardization for annotation itself. For example, in Comment, where our major domain of application is education, we have strongly resisted including in Comment models of rating, of scoring students, because we believe it might be very important to rate and score students, but that's not for an annotation tool to do. It's just to offer the type of ways to plug whatever model of scoring and annotation you have with your tool. And I think I would advocate that the annotation standardization effort, which is already embracing a very wide domain, remains focused on its core substance.
Okay. So I think that is it. And so we're moving on to the next topic. Thank you, everybody. That was great discussion.